But we live in a world that is basically the Stone Age with a veneer of contemporary society.
Hey folks, I'm Gale Huxley.
I'm Rick Chambers.
Welcome to Book Sense. We view the world through perceptual lenses. You carry many of them with you now. Your common sense, your culture. On Book Sense, we talk about all aspects of life, history, and society through the lens of stories. So choose your tool, a lens or a spyglass. Use it to break through soil until you feel fresh air, and join us. The quote for today's episode is by the author Sayaka Murata. I wanted to note this because in just a moment and several times throughout the episode, you will hear us butcher it. And if you're listening right now, you're probably thinking, you still did. But anyway, and that's my fault. Every week that we record, I bring or email Dr. Rick what I've come to call a sense sheet, which are available for most episodes. So, Dr. Rick is sometimes not familiar with the authors, and from the first time I read this wonderful book, I got it stuck in my mind that the author's name is Sayaka. Book Sense is not scripted. It is a natural flow of conversation, based mostly off of thoughts and questions on the sheet, or sometimes not even. And often we make mistakes, which I've decided not to edit out. And I realize this is against much of the internet's expectations. I'm not married to my mistakes, though, so I will do better when it comes to things like names, but we've already recorded 24 episodes as you're listening to this, so please forgive our mistakes. We truly respect the authors and the material, so now enjoy this week's episode. So this quote is from Convenience Store Woman. It was released last year. It's written by Sayaka Murata. It's her first novel translated in English, though she's very well known in Japan. She has been named Vogue's Japan's Woman in the Year. She's won the prestigious Gale Prize, yet she still works part-time as a convenience store clerk in Tokyo. And that's where we get the title of this book for, Convenience Store Woman. It is about a woman who really has no desire other than to work as a convenience store clerk. Not because she's forced to work there and she has no other options, but because that's where she's happiness. She enjoys the routine. She doesn't wish for anything that's lofty, really. She doesn't wish for wealth. She's happy in her small apartment with her food that is described at one point in the book as dog food. I really connected with this novel because although I have sometimes grand aspirations that feel unattainable, I also feel like her. I just wish to live and not feel so driven all the time. This novel is different because she doesn't want a career or to be a wife.
Very interesting choice and kind of an interesting turn. Western literature and stories and everything are either epic or heroic, or there's kind of that scale that's about the big and the hero. This is very anti-hero, or
yeah, it's usually about ambition. This one is the opposite of ambition.
Yes. I've noticed, not in books so much, but in movies. There was maybe 5 years ago with Hunger Games and many of the movies, there was this shift to female protagonists. And they were heroes, but they were all reluctant heroes. They weren't conquering territory. They weren't even seeking to be in the heroic role. They were forced into it. Yeah, and so I think something's happening to this idea of, or maybe we're paying attention to either the reluctant hero or working on this image of a hero as being what the story is about. So you've been reading this genre. It's brand new to me, as was the last episode with Sylvia Plath. and trying to wrap my head around what's, if it's a story, what's driving the narrative. Um, usually it could be an ambition, or it can be a grand passion or something. And this is a real challenge, it's the absence, or it seems to be the absence of a grand passion, or something to like drive her life.
Yeah, there's so much wonderful support for women and everybody but you have to have a dream to be supported. You don't have to be a wife, but it's okay if you are. But it's just, you have to have something to hold on to. It's not seen, or it's not talked about enough, that to just live. Because also, just to live, is there privilege with that?
Yeah, you ask a child, and we even talked about this, I think, last time. What are you going to be when you grow up? And so an astronaut is a good answer, or a pilot, or something, and usually it's these sports figures, where it's like the top of the heap, or something very, very ambitious is kind of the expectation. And could that even set people up for having, most of us have ordinary lives.
Yeah, and that's why ordinary lives feel just sometimes, they don't feel like enough. Every movie, every
Feels
book,
like a failure, not just not enough.
Yeah, because it's so difficult to live up to that childhood dream that I don't know if it would have developed on its own. As a child, I was always trying to figure out what I wanted to be, and it was always something like ridiculously lofty.
Excellent, yeah. And that perhaps perhaps it's inside us, but perhaps it's also communicated by parents and by the culture as a whole, of this expectation of having lofty, really big dreams that drive your life.
And there's something else. I think about this a lot. Nature versus nurture. Like, is it born within us, or is it something else? Would we have so much drive? But I think there is a desire that's very human. Everybody wants to be special somehow. That's part of the reason why, besides reproducing, continuing the human race, it's to be seen. And that's what we were talking about last week with Sylvia Plath, to be seen, because even if you think you're normal, you believe there's something you hold within you that sets you apart from everybody else.
And this is quite a shift again from last week, but I think they can be seen in relationship to each other, of Sylvia Plath's extreme hunger for experience. Never read all the books I want to read, and in fact, kind of getting to a position of it being hard to know how to act, but of feeling this like starving desire for everything. And it's not unusual in the East to accent an ordinary life. It's a part of Buddhism. I've read a good bit about, one author said, like, the big lesson is you're nobody special. And that being a type of enlightenment, even.
Yes.
The desire to be special kind of takes us into a lot of illusions. So in Buddhism, the idea of life is suffering, and suffering has to do with attachments. And so attachments to dreams, attachments to an envied identity, attachment even to ambition, Buddhism can see as setting the person up for suffering. So in one way, would it be possible to admire someone that is absolutely not suffering, working at a convenience store all of her life without wanting anything else? The lack of desire, is that something to envy, or is that something to dread or to shame?
Well, often we see it, I mean, we see as working in waitressing or working in a convenience store as a necessity. You assume that person had another dream, another goal, but they're working there because they
Or as a
can't find.
means to another end.
Yeah, they're working to have a better life, we say.
Yes.
But why isn't that if a good enough life? And part of it is because, especially in today's world, it's so hard for families to support themselves. Or we talk a lot about minimum wage, and minimum wage, people can't afford an apartment, even working 60 hours a week. So and this comes up in this book, that you can hardly support yourself. Why would you want a job where you can hardly support yourself?
It's this amazing thing, even the author herself working in a convenience store when you don't have to. I do know, I've heard Tolstoy worked with the peasants for half a day, would write for half a day and work with the peasants for a half day.
And I see that's pretty common among a lot of writers, because writers often write about, they're trying to communicate life experience. And
George Orwell worked as like in a hotel.
Yeah. I mean, and if you don't spend time with people, how can you write about people? How can you write about common experience without, if you're, holed up all day, or if you're in a job that is very lofty? We see people who are uber wealthy celebrities as out of touch, almost inhuman. That's why we look to them and they're compared as modern gods.
Yes.
Because their lives are so different from ours.
Their needs are immediately fulfilled. They can indulge themselves every whim.
Not to say they don't have problems, but
right.
It's not common problems.
Yes. And so when you first read this, to the larger quote to me, I said, I know where I'd like to go with this, and it has to do, this character would subvert capitalism and subvert consumerism. To not only does she not have ambition to climb a ladder, to be special, to move up, she doesn't desire anything. And in the consumer world, that's a very unusual story. That in the biological world, we're kind of wired, let's say, for survival, but it's the drives, the instincts or drives are toward pleasure, aggression. So there was this sense of we're driven by instincts. And then culture puts a layer over that of success or achievement, those type of things. And this character feels none of those.
No, she doesn't even, and it's not just a career in the novel. She's a virgin, she's celibate, she doesn't even feel the need to have a boyfriend or any sort of human relations. She makes friends with women in her neighborhood, but she feels so set apart from them. She fakes having a boyfriend just to feel a little bit more included, because they're constantly asking her, when is your life going to change?
Yes. And you mentioned fake, and in another quote that may be good to read, you mentioned like a mask.
Yes.
And so there's this pressure to at least fake or to at least look like you have desires and ambitions.
Yeah. And
or drive.
Success is everything, to do very, very well.
Right. And that success is also connected to like honor to family, honor to yourself, how you're seen by others. There's tremendous pressure to be seen as doing well.
Yeah, and something that I've been thinking about as I was reading or preparing for this week, thinking about this quote, is we're at this strange place where I'm looking through social media, watching YouTube videos. There's so much support to just be happy, to live your life, but there's also this extreme drive where I see all these like Instagram entrepreneurs that are like, why aren't you working? You could be where I am.
And again, all of those are subtle messages, as this is how you should live your life.
Yeah, and it's only driving like there's a lot of criticism of capitalism, and we're living in a very consumeristic society. That
And
idea.
early in capitalism, conspicuous consumption almost being marketing for capitalism.
Yeah.
And very much, and it's as if everyone's caught on to that now. And so somehow spending is kind of advertising for yourself, and especially spending that's displayed to others. And so this need to have more and more desires, and then the idea that desires can be manufactured and created. But this character seems to have an immunity to all of that.
Yes, and I'll read a quote in just a
Yes.
moment, but by the end of the book, and this is a spoiler if you want to read the book
Right.
at some point, but she decides that she's not even human, that she is a convenient, her identity is a convenient, not her identity, what she is a convenience store worker. She makes
Yes.
that distinction at the end, and that's really interesting because I don't
Kind
know.
of a non-human convenience store worker.
Yeah, I mean, she fully accepts it by the end, and this is why I loved the ending at first and didn't think much of it. I felt so wrapped up in the book, but now I'm so confused about what the message is communicating. That has she given in, and she feels that she's been made to feel that she's not human because she just wants to work at a convenience store? Or is this inspiring because she takes control of her identity? At the end of the book, she's going for a job interview to start a career for herself, since working at a convenience store isn't seen as a career, and she walks into a convenience store on her way to the job interview. She doesn't even work there. She's quit her first job at a convenience store. She starts arranging things, and then she starts getting almost manic. She's arranging things, she's excited, and then it's as if she melts into the store. So
Excellent.
I don't know what that is communicating.
Yes. Jumping back to all of the support for ambition and personal growth, all kinds of things. So in the career of counseling, or the field of kind of counseling and consulting, there's psychotherapy, but the big trend in a lot of ways has been toward coaching, which I've always felt in some sense was coaching for success. Like at the heart of coaching, the way I divide it is kind of for psychotherapy, at the heart of that is alleviating suffering.
Mm-hmm.
But there's another style that is about facilitating and working with people using exactly the same skills almost to facilitate or incubate success. And that's just very different. It didn't have the same kind of appeal for me.
Yeah. Do you see that a lot, though, that a lot of people come to you feeling as if they haven't achieved success, and that instills a lot of problems for them? Is it suffering of the soul or something outside of that you see more problems?
Well, this particular one, usually it's a more immediate problem and a more, but am I a success, self-esteem, identity, it's in the background. It's interesting, in the 50s, Erich Fromm wondered why there was more suicide in the modern industrial world than in what's now called the third world countries. I don't know if that's what it was called
now it's
at
called
the time.
the developing world.
Yes, right?
Yes.
And he said it has to do with one word: failure. Failure becomes the boogeyman that we're all beginning in first grade, if not before then. Oh, the college scandal this week, admissions scandal, is the kind of failure or a kind of, again, to achieve this status or achieve something. But a fear of being a failure, of being seen as a failure, has to be in the background somewhere.
Yeah. And the college admissions scandal, I've seen so much about that this week. And a lot of what I see is, why is this so shocking to people that rich people are buying their way into schools? But then I see a lot of people, and I thought this was interesting, people are saying, well, if I had money, I would do the exact same thing for my children. And it is, yeah, because these children of what was her name? Lori Loughlin was one of the one of the people who bought her children's way, and they said, why? I saw people saying, well, why wasn't okay for her child to just be average and her to accept that her child would only get into an average school.
So I had said fear of failure in the background, and yet in this case, it's the anger is more toward the feeling of entitlement and specialness.
Oh, yeah.
It's not just avoiding failure, it's this idea.
Oh, yeah, that is the root of the problem. I think that if you look from these celebrities or rich people's perspective, that they feel like they're failures as parents if their children are average, if they're not celebrities going to great school. But the much bigger problem also is like it reveals flaws in the justice system, because there's black women are people that don't black parents, I mean, is what I've seen, that are in jail because they put addresses like their parents or of other people that weren't theirs to get their children into a better school system, and they're in prison.
Excellent. And this, people's reactions are strange to me. If they're saying, I would do exactly the same thing. It's this, versus the people that are really angry about that's unfair. So there's this new ethos that is like achievement at all, give your children every advantage possible. And like that's your duty as parents, even at the same time as you're teaching them to cheat.
Yeah.
Or rig the system or use the system. Yeah, so wanting could even be like the best schools for my child. But again, here's a convenience store worker who seems to have gotten around all of this, that seems, which is why she's questioning, am I even human? And she knows there's a difference, but she can't really put her finger on the difference, or but it's this lack of drive or lack of something.
Yeah.
And yet, look at how much trouble drives cause, and ambition causes, and wanting causes. And traditional faiths have been about limiting that. But they've kind of, in real modern culture, they've disappeared. In talking about, of course, people want to be special, I don't think that happened until the urban world and until the modern world. In a rural world, agricultural world, pre-modern world, or even in the world today, if you're not in this like bubble, certain bubble, you're only embedded in your ordinary life. But no one would anyone not feel special, like on the small scale, everybody's needed, everybody's special, everybody is a vital part of the whole.
Yes.
And so this like dreams and wanting to accomplish the dreams is a very modern, it has to do with a certain type of consciousness that was developed in the modern world. She's living in the modern world, but with a very different kind of consciousness.
Yeah, and that type of attitude is kind of seen as off-putting. And it's not just about her being nice, because often it's, like, for me, I feel like I haven't become more successful because I don't want to step on anybody. I don't want to, and it seems now that you have to step on somebody to be successful. Growing up, there was this girl that I was always put at odds with because she said, I will step on anybody, even my own family, to get to where I want.
Excellent.
And right now, modern terms, she's more successful than I am. And it's taken me a long time to come to terms with that because I've been told over and over, well, you're going to have that attitude. You're just going to have to get over, not being afraid to put yourself out there because I haven't, because I do feel like, okay, well, I can't just put myself out there without stepping on somebody. That seems like a part of the process. It's just how it is.
Right. So in an old school novel, a person that says, I would step on my family to get to the top would be the villain. In a modern novel, how would they be seen?
Well, in a modern novel, as the hero, not the hero, maybe an anti-hero. I don't know. But I feel like that's
But
sort
they
of
would not be
changing.
seen as the villain.
No. But I think that's starting to change a little bit. But yet there is no solution.
Excellent.
There is no way to act differently.
There's this uproar about being caught or being brought to justice. But underneath the surface, ethos, like within people, to go, it's the right thing to cheat for your child. And I can tell you over the last 30 years that has grown. That used to be seen as unthinkable. Sportsmanship versus gamesmanship in athletics. There was an ethos of sportsmanship. Like, it wasn't about winning the game, it was how you played the game. And all of those things, the world seems to be moving away from. Embracing this new ethos of be a winner, achieve,
Yes.
whatever it takes.
But yet we live in a world of scandal because if the person gets caught for doing that,
So the subtle
life's
message
over.
is like, do it, but don't get caught.
yeah.
Or are people in a bind, this terrible bind?
Yeah, well, as you were talking about, like, parents cheating for their children, but they're already in a position of wealth. I was thinking, what about parents who, like, drug dealers who are doing it just to get by for their family, and they're treated so harshly. They're put in prison all of their lives, but they were doing something technically illegal to help their family, but yet I do not at all feel any malice towards that, even if it was illegal.
Which is a different kind of story. There are those stories, and they're beginning to tell those stories it's always been within the mafia genre, I guess, of like this is just doing business or whatever, and that there's a very you take care of your own or you take care of your family.
Yes, because in a way, even though they're heroes or anti-heroes, they're a victim of the way society is structured.
And then both of those things are different from being desperate. And so in high school, I had to read John Steinbeck's *The Pearl*. That was a story about something very similar, where they were pearl divers, and the diver discovered the pearl of great worth, and as he was like trying to get the highest price for it, it destroyed his family, and his wife tried to throw the pearl away, and had this whole different value set. But so there, where the ambition, there's always been kind of this story of if you want wealth and material things too much, it often comes at the price of your relationships.
Or of your humanity. And
Excellent,
TV,
excellent.
The Sopranos, that's very much what that story was about. Tony Soprano ended it was,
There's a price.
Yeah, at the cost of his family, his wife.
Yes.
I mean, I was watching something that explained that show. I've never actually watched the show, so I didn't know. But it is a common, or Breaking Bad.
Yes.
Now he's trying to have money for his family, but it ended
Weeds.
up... Yeah. Oh, yeah, I love that show. Because you don't often get to see a woman in that position. It's either with prostitution or sexuality, or for the woman. They don't get to have the action story. It's something that's always... Like, sexuality is more shameful than killing people.
But I can guarantee none of these stories work for an old school traditional person. If you're violating like norms.
Yeah, I mean, reading back in history, I've been reading another podcast. Lore is a book, and I was reading about like one of the stories was talking about how he was appointed king because his brothers, I don't remember which king, to be honest, children were too young, so he killed his brother's children so he could stay king. I mean, as long as you look back into humanity, people came into positions of power by dominating others. It's not completely new either. It's very much a part of humanity.
Excellent. Very much a part, especially of the powerful. So, like within monarchies, it was a very dangerous, like children could be killed, family members are killed. Um, yes. And yet, at that same time, not that there wasn't violence in other parts of society, and tragedies and things, and yet, because there was no climbing the ladder, there were very few people that were struggling with power. It is this idea of somehow power puts people at odds with each other, and can often, if there's enough money there, if there's enough power there, that line of violence will probably be crossed.
Yeah, and I see a lot because millennials or Generation Z are often accused of being little, like snowflakes, because they're
Yes.
not so much about are this generation coming up. And as I was reading Parkland about the Parkland activists, they were just trying to be bipartisan and kind to everybody to reach success. But what I hear from older generations is, well, not everyone can be winners. You just have to accept that there's going to be losers in
Yes.
life. And I think, well, is that a hard reality that I have to face? That there has to be some losers? Can it be restructured?
Right. And winners and losers aren't really the category in this character's head. She doesn't
No.
process in those terms. And yet those have become the assumed terms in our heads today. I'd like for people to understand multiple value systems and how they're operating at the same time. It can be through time with traditional, modern, postmodern, and traditional is not past. It's still in the world today. It's inside people's psychology. But there are also conflicting values. We used to do temperament training, and that's where you have the 4 colors or the 4 animals. But there seems to be these 4 motivations within people. Some people are motivated toward competence and power. Some people are motivated for structure and order. Other people are motivated for kind of fun and spontaneity and freedom. But there's a group of people, and they were the Blues, that are motivated by harmony. They just want everybody, they truly want everybody to get along and no one to get hurt. And it's a motivation within them and a drive, just like ambition is in other people. And so certainly if you were the one that didn't want to climb over other people, that's kind of a blue temperament. And it's very interesting, there's never been a blue temperament president.
No.
And the people that do this kind of talks and things like that, and that kind of look at these temperaments, almost all of our presidents have been the green temperament, but it's also the most common temperament in jails.
Something I was thinking about, though, I've heard a president from Georgia, Jimmy Carter.
Yes.
He's one of the only presidents I've heard that's constantly criticized. He was a good man, but he was weak. He wasn't
Yes.
fit for being president.
Yes. And he comes the closest to being blue. He's blue in terms of his values, but in terms of personality, he's an engineer by background, and so he's very technical in his thinking, but had very blue values, but was technically more of a green temperament.
Yeah, but talking about the presidency, that's people just want strong. That's something that comes up a lot. Strong,
the idea
strong.
to value relationships, to value caring, in from this other ethos is seen as weak.
And that's why for the longest time it was people assumed women couldn't be president. Even my own
excellent.
family. I
Yes.
was thinking about this recently, what internalized misogyny that you don't even realize.
Excellent.
Because a female family member said, "Oh, a woman could not be president. Imagine when she gets her period." And I was thinking, You're a woman, and you know that when you get your period, you're still able to work. You're still able to do everything else. Like, that's actually a strength. You're in pain, and you're still working and making decisions. Maybe you're emotional, but you
Right.
still can let that be a strength.
Funny you should mention that. A lot of people know homosexuality was in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual as a mental illness and was taken out, I believe, in the late 60s, early 70s. But late luteal phase disorder was taken out in, I believe, the 80s. And the argument, what it was PMS. And that was seen as a mental illness.
Yeah.
And it was taken out. And I remember this. The argument was a president can't have a mental illness, or that's grounds for impeachment. And so, what if a woman has PMS and is president? So that was actually the example that was used as like a reason to take it out. And yet, like women, how much pressure is there for women to go overboard, showing they're not caring, that they can do what's necessary, that they're going to put goals above people in the like business world, in the political world.
Even in personal lives, I changed my behavior so much as a teenager so that the men, the boys that I was around didn't treat me as weaker, as like just nothing but feminine. When I started drinking, I drank whiskey because I thought if I was seen with whiskey, they wouldn't say like, oh, you're just drinking a girly drink, you're just very feminine. I changed like my taste in music, how I spoke, even because I thought that feminine wasn't strength. If I took on what's seen as traditionally masculine, I would be taken more seriously.
Yes. And so it kind of expands into we were talking about presidents and strength and things like that, and then caring being seen as the opposite. But again, as with Sylvia Plath, anything that begins to get associated with feminine, with emotion, begins to be seen from a certain point of view, if not pathological, as weakness. But maybe pathological even. And it was, how was this woman seen, this character seen by others? Because she seems not unhappy. It seems others had more trouble with her than she had with being herself.
There is not a single character in this book that accepts her. Her sister tells her that she needs to get married or get a career. It's one or the other. She invites a man to live with her who actually, he has no job at all.
Yes.
But yet he says, well, I'm a man, he's about the same age as her. She's 37, he's maybe 36. He says, well, I always have the opportunity to start over. Because a woman that's like past 30, and especially in Japanese culture, youth is so emphasized. Even in America it is.
Yes.
Man has a chance to start over. But yeah, if I could read a quote from this, it'll kind of make it clear.
Yes. And yet even this person who experiences herself as non-human does do some faking and putting on a mask in order to insulate herself a little bit from this, how she's seen by others.
Yes. She invites this man to live with her who was her coworker, and it's for both of them because one, it turns out he's hiding, but to not pay something, but to make it look like they're in a relationship. So, and everybody in her life, the women that she hangs around, they're excited for her. Her sister's excited for her until they meet him and they realize there's something off there. But they think finally she's heading in the right direction.
Excellent.
But if I could read a quote, please. That will maybe make it clearer. It says, you need to wake up, Furukura. Furukura, I may be pronouncing this wrong.
Right.
To put it bluntly, you're the lowest of the low. Your womb is probably too old to be of any use, and you don't even have the looks to serve as a means to satisfy carnal desire. But then neither are you earning money like a man. Far from it. You're only working part-time, without even a proper job. Frankly speaking, you're just a burden on the village, the dregs of society. And this is her speaking. I see, but I'm not capable of working anywhere else except the convenience store. I did give it a go, but it turns out the convenience store worker masks is the only one I'm fit to wear. So if people don't accept that, I have no idea what I can do about it. And then he responds and he says, that's why contemporary society is dysfunctional. They might mumble nice things about diversity of lifestyles and whatnot, but in the end, nothing has changed since prehistoric times. With the birth rate in decline, society is regressing rapidly to the Stone Age, and it's going beyond life just being uncomfortable. Society has reached a stage in which not being of any use to the village means being condemned just for existing.
Excellent. And the original quote, but we live in a world that is basically the Stone Age with a veneer of contemporary society.
We know that we're animals. The biological function is the only part we think that remains of the Stone Age, not society.
Yes. So he gives her the 1-2 punch. The first punch is toward the physical, biological, and really, really old, that a woman's worth is the children she can produce, and is directly connected to the womb. And this is a contemporary novel, and yet that's the first punch.
Yeah. And I would like to think that we're moving beyond this, feminism is helping, so much work with feminism, that you don't have to be married. Yet, when I got married, I constantly am being asked by family members, when are you going to have children? You are having children,
I was going
right?
to say, this goes beyond being married. This is being married so that you can have children. Then you have worth to the village.
Yeah, because if you ask some people what are humans here for? It says, so the race can progress. And so there's a lot of wonderful, social justice.
Is that why
work.
men are here or why women are here in, the patriarchy?
Yeah, both. But, where is the place for people who are not interested in sexuality, who are asexual, who are voluntarily celibate? And this is who the Sayaka Murata and her other stories, I haven't been able to read them because most aren't translated. She talks about that a lot. There's a lot of representation for all, what we say is all types of people, but not really for people who are asexual and really don't want, not just to have children, but don't want any part in sexuality or romantic relationships at all.
Excellent, excellent. This is the best word for what it seems other people feel for her, and it's a very painful word, is contempt. To feel like kind of she lives in everyone, like what she needed a little insulation from, is this, and the contempt, he kind of voices it, but it's contempt. They can't just leave her alone or let her be.
And I think at some level, even people who are ambitious feel this way because, it's really hard to get the career you want. And millennials talk about this a lot. I just spent all this money, I went to college, and now there's no jobs for me. And to see people who are successful at your age, or people who are successful in general, it just feels so bad because people are always asking, well, what job are you working? And if you say, oh, I'm a waitress, or...
So you mentioned mask. In a sense, what if everyone in a consumer society is often wearing a mask to protect themselves from the contempt for being a burden on the village? So the first one was toward having children, which does go back to the Stone Age perhaps, and especially toward women, being the value of women. Then he kind of hits her with the consumer ethos. You're not contributing to the economy. So to not be a consumer, not only to not be climbing up, but the real offense is she doesn't want anything.
No, she's living in near poverty, but she doesn't want to live in a different situation. She eats something that he describes as dog food, and she never realized that what she was eating was bad until he said so.
Which is a word you had used earlier. Along with contempt comes shame or shaming. So calling it dog food and everything. And again, it's other people's reaction to this lack of or wanting and desiring.
And I think, though, contempt or that behavior, any sort of hateful attitude, it comes always from insecurity. It sets something deep within
Excellent.
people off.
Excellent.
Because I assess my own behaviors. Anytime that I'm feeling jealous or I lash out at somebody, it is almost always because it hits a very insecure place within me.
Yes. And this is where book sense, this author has presented almost the ultimate challenge to people today. Or in this character, she presents, and maybe even in her own lifestyle, she presents a challenge to almost all of our assumptions. Very easily, this character could have been St. Francis could be a saint with just a little tweaking or a little. St. Francis was raised in a wealthy family. There was a movie, Brother Sister Sister Moon is where I get this, but he renounced all of his wealth and chose poverty. Monks always take a vow. Monks take a vow of chastity, poverty. So at first it's as if she's creating this entirely like kind of novel character, but she's putting them in a convenience store that could be seen as a saint, like kind of to not be driven by desire. That is very much a Christian and Buddhist saint.
But I was thinking, I tend to be a little bit idealistic. Isn't it a fact that the world could not work if everyone was like her?
Excellent.
It would be undone.
Certainly the economy wouldn't.
Yes, and then what would, with the economy falls apart? I mean, for any real change that people want, a change that's necessary for the society to be less consumer, to rely less on capitalism, a different system, the world would have to be completely undone. My life would be jeopardized, my children's life would be jeopardized, but eventually, maybe a century from now, we'd reach a better world. But is anybody willing to compromise their lives and their children's lives for a better world, for massive undoing and probably terror? It's a question I can't answer, but I think about it a lot.
Yes. So there's a danger in too much wanting, but perhaps there is a danger to not enough wanting.
Yes, if everyone was like her, we wouldn't have people health care
Right.
or anything.
Right. There's a little of her in me, though. I used to have this fantasy of Callaway Gardens when they built the bike trail, there was a ferry boat that would take people across the lake. And I kind of always thought I could have that job of the ferry captain, because it's not demanding at all. And you're in nature, like that life, very, very simple life, away from all like kind of demand. There's a fantasy about that.
Yeah, I relate to that so much because in school I almost wondered if it was dumb, because the tasks I loved the most were the really mundane, repetitive tasks.
Excellent.
And I think it's because partially I'm an anxious person and it didn't make me anxious to do mundane tasks, but I loved these really repetitive, mundane, almost meditative tasks. And there's a quote, and I can't remember who said it. I'll have to look it up, but he said, I feel as if I'm paraphrasing, I'm getting it wrong. I feel as if I was made to do nothing. And I feel that way a lot. I am so content with my days spent doing nothing. That's when I am at my happiest. And I think in a world where there's so many demands, you have to work all day, people delight in doing nothing over the weekend. I saw a meme that said,
Excellent.
What makes adults happiness? When you ask them what they're doing, they say, nothing this weekend.
Excellent. Free time.
Yeah.
Yes. And so it's accepted there if the person, I've heard a lot of some people saying like, the first thing everyone does in their conversation is convince everyone else how busy they are, which is kind of saying how much value they have. And so if you've done that, you can talk about wanting some free time. And yet what you just confessed is very risky for all of the reasons that we talked about, to actually, like, kind of to embrace that.
Yeah. I mean, it is.
It was not easy for us to get to
Yeah.
in the conversation, or even in any conversation.
And you said it brings upon contempt, and I don't want to say people treated me with contempt, but after I graduated and I moved to France. I had the idea in mind. I told everybody that I was going to do nothing but write and work on novels. This was largely due to mental health, but I ended up getting nothing done. And then I moved back, and I have so many plans, so many ambitions, but I can't seem to make myself work. So much of my life in the past few years, I haven't had much to say for myself. And I don't lie to people, so I just tell them, I'm not doing much of anything. And it's always creates such an awkward atmosphere.
Yes. Contempt may be on one end, or shame. At the very least, it's bafflement or confusion. Probably the fastest way to be accepted in a group is to want desperately what everyone else wants. But to not want the same thing that everyone else wants creates confusion or bafflement.
And that's why the people who don't want the same things as everyone else, especially artists, they're always the outliers of society. They're more prone towards solitude. And recently I've realized that I need to start making connections with people again, that the only way that I will feel fulfilled is human relationships. But I spent most of my time in solitude in the past few years. I'm married, but he works all day, and I'm comfortable in solitude. Even though what's interesting is there's not judgment from everybody else, but the judgment in my head intensified as I spent more and more time alone because of what I see of, contempt. Or I read these entrepreneurial pages that are like, why aren't you hustling? You should not be, you can take a break, and from 6 months from now, you can't sleep.
Yes. And so, in a way, perhaps only alone can you discover that the voices advocating for this, demanding this, are actually, like, somehow it gets in our head. So that even when we're alone, the voice is still there.
Oh, yes. And
in an intensified form. In polite society, the person is just baffled.
And I was projecting, and I think that's why the voice became so loud in my head, because when I go to parties or I would hang out with friends or something, and there would be that bafflement, I would imagine what they're thinking.
Excellent.
And project that on them and in my own mind.
Right. In some ways, if you step out of culture, out of the mix, maybe the only way of seeing culture, of actually seeing it for what it is.
Yes, you've mentioned before falling out of culture. You fell out of culture.
Yes.
At some point. And I wonder if everybody experiences that at some point. Recently, my husband, who's a very social person, he stopped being a social and started being really confused. And I saw it as, I told him, I said, this is your falling out of culture. Like, it's a...
But you said that almost like it's exciting.
I was excited for him because for me, and I think almost, not for everybody, but a lot of people who have suffered or been through a difficult time in their life, I learned so much that I couldn't have learned otherwise if I would have forced myself to just continue as I was, forcing myself to get a job that I didn't like, or being around people that I didn't connect with. Not that I'm, above anybody, it's just didn't connect with them at the time.
So you hear these terms to, like, find your own voice, or to find who you are. If you have not experienced falling out of culture, you may think you found who you are, but it's probably who you were expected to be.
Yes.
And so in order to, I don't know if there's another way to find the the truly individual voice. Now, Jung said that's for middle life usually, that the first half of life is kind of the challenge is to fit into whatever culture you're in. And then he called it individuation. In the second half of life, it is a tremendous amount of work to find out who you actually are. But usually we just have a crisis or get distracted somehow, or there are lots
Buy
of
a
ways.
motorcycle.
Yes, yes,
But yet, it's only youth who are allowed to be lost as well, in
yes.
some ways. And I was talking about, like, the only way I could, if I would have fallen out and had solitude and done nothing. But I also realized, like, I was extremely lucky to be able to have so much time to do nothing. Like, how does somebody fall out of culture and find themselves when they have to work a 9-to-5 job, when they have to pay the bills? Is there a way to have to go through that if you have so much responsibility placed on you and you're just trying to survive?
They're trying to get in the culture.
Yeah, I mean,
because the culture. So this is the culture sets the rules. To be out of culture is a pretty desperate place.
I mean, sometimes it means it's a matter of survival, of eating, of having,
Yes.
of being healthy because you need
Yes.
health care.
And so, if the male character in the novel could, he would have excommunicated her or sent her off away from the village as a drain, and literally that used to happen.
Mm-hmm.
So inside all of us is this fear. Social rejection is death. It is one of the biggest fears in us, not being seen as a member of the village.
Yeah, some of the most celebrated people in history, they were apart from the village. They they could have only created what they did from being a part of the village. It's only if you accomplish something that you're celebrated.
So started this talking about she's like very unheroic, but the hero's journey is to leave the village, find what the village can't find, and bring it back to the village.
Yet
she's not on the hero's, not as presented here.
Yeah, because in the end, she decides to stay exactly where she was. She does this circle, comes back to where she was in the beginning, but with a greater acceptance of it.
And finally an identity. I'm a convenience store worker.
Yes. She said this is her mask, but now the mask is like glued to her face, kind of.
Excellent.
It melds into her skin, melts into it.
Yes. And yet becomes machine-like. There's been all this science fiction about takeover of the machines or the battle with the machines, but it is... She lost herself in the store. She became the store. Mm-hmm. Now, craftsmen have always lost themselves in their work. And so, but usually it's a craft. But convenience store work, in a way, for her, like, it had that element, but we don't usually in service industry, like, we don't think about that as craft.
Yeah. There was an element of community in this, too, if I'm remembering correctly.
Excellent.
There was a part of this novel, if I'm remembering right, where they were afraid of a big supermarket taking over. Because for her, she remembered every person that came into the store every day, some coming in for years. She knew exactly what they wanted. She had it laid out. She was a member of the community, even if she wasn't
an
in her
essential part of it.
Yes,
and would be missed.
Yeah, because at the end, she was her co-workers, her manager. They did something for her. They said, "You're welcome to come back," because every other person was in and out of the job constantly. She was the only person that worked there for over a decade.
At one point in my life, I got very good at developing the identity of the regular. That's an identity. I like being, like at a restaurant, the regular.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is satisfying to go into a coffee shop. They know your order, or a restaurant. There is something nice about that.
and that's perhaps that's a type of what utopia, or there's a lot of hints or suggestions in this, and yet sounds like a great author because she doesn't resolve like anything. Proposes a lot of um, what as we said in book sense, the chance to perceive and think about some things. Everybody's been in a convenience store. Everybody knows unambitious people. Everybody knows invisible people.
Hmm.
And she gave us a chance to make them visible.
I typed into Google, have we progressed as a society, as a culture? And I came across this Wired article that was about Stone Age social networking. And they talked about the Hadza people, I may be pronouncing that wrong, who live closest to hunter-gatherer tribes as they could find. And they studied the way they communicate and found they communicate similarly to us, that they are more likely to help, to reach out to people who look like them, who have the same interests as we do, or as they do, even within their own tribe, which is similar to how we communicate in society today. So the assumption there was that it's always been this way, that we really haven't progressed the way we communicate, but
Yes.
it makes sense if you think biologically.
So that could be not progressing, but it could also be a continuity with the Stone Age. And so certainly to be of value to the tribe, to not be kicked out of the tribe, to be valued by the tribe. Can you have humans without having that? It does go back to the Stone Age. And when she says she didn't experience herself as human, she had a need to kind of hide it or to fake. But she did seem a little impervious to people's contempt and shame, which is kind of non human.
Mm-hmm.
To not have to belong to a tribe somewhere.
Yeah, and although empathy is a really human trait, and I don't know if it's developed in modern society because we're so desensitized to so much happening in the world. We read true crime, we see murder, and we can just keep flipping through the channels. But I think deep within everybody there is that, because we are selfish in many ways. We're thinking of ourselves and taking care of ourselves.
Yes. Often tribes called themselves the people, and then they had names for other tribes. And what this is, I'm glad the research, or I'm glad they're pointing this out. We had talked before about this word kindness that sounds so nice, and it is of value. But even hidden in that word is the idea this is how we treat people who are like our kind. And there are different roles for us and them, different ethics for us and them. And yet, you mentioned empathy. There are two things. I think for the first time ever, we're in a global society where we're going to have to come to terms with there's no real them. There's no real us. We're having to come to terms with this idea of like the village.
And I see a lot of talk, or I've seen, how do we eradicate this tribal mindset? And I wonder, because I wish so badly for everyone to understand, like, treat people with, empathy, with not seeing, I mean, of course there's difference, but celebrating and respecting that difference. Right. But also I wonder if this is, back to prehistoric times, people were way more likely to help people that looked like them, that acted like them. Is it so ingrained in us that we'll never be able to reach what people are fighting so hard for?
Which brings up about 20 shows that I just presented at the Carnegie on us and them, a biological basis of us and them, and how our brain interprets us and them. And so it's research is coming in hot and heavy in this area that kind of says, and even the fact that oxytocin that creates the bonding chemical that creates us, it's the physiological experience of us or of bonding or of love, increases aggression toward others. So it's this biological insolvable problem that we have that can be overcome, because you've mentioned empathy several times. It was not a common word 20 to 30 years ago.
Empathy, was it?
Exactly, yes. Very, very specialized word. I think people are feeling more empathy than they ever have. I think it is like on the rise as empathy.
I mean, taking it to an extreme, some people identify as empaths.
Yes.
That they're especially sensitive to what other people are feeling.
Yes. I watched a movie that was on, I've forgotten, there were two hypnotists that worked with the unconscious before Freud, but it was the story of the person that developed, Buer, I think is his name, but developed the talking cure. And there was a lady that he could hypnotize, and she would go into a trance, behave very bizarrely, and then he would bring her out of the trance. And he toured around to teach all the psychiatrists of that day. But the movie portrayed her, so she had hysteria in the movie. There was an illness again. The movie, it's a current movie, but it portrayed her as an empath. She had, at first, she had these spells whenever animals were treated cruelly. But in the day, it was called hysteria and mental illness. So someone that's an empath in the past, yeah, I'm certain there were, and we even discovered like mirror neurons, which they're kind of proposing is the basis of empathy, biological basis of empathy, all the way to chimps. It was discovered in chimps, but it varies greatly. These neurons, the number of mirror neurons or von Economo neurons, something like that. They're these very specialized, visibly different neurons in the brain that we think are the seat of empathy. And then empathy can be developed.
Even if you're born without it. Say, like, people that it's their frontal lobe, right? That if there's not a lot of activity, that's
Yes.
where sociopaths
Especially
come
on the
from.
right side.
Yeah. So if you are, say, born without a lot of activity in the frontal lobe, can it be learned? Or can it only be faked? And perhaps we're going off onto a different subject.
It can be
here.
developed. It can be developed. And there are certainly people that are empaths that are very, they can't help but feel a lot of empathy.
Yeah, and when I first came across this term, because somebody said to me, it sounds like you're an empath, because
Right.
I am so sensitive to every single person
Yes.
I walk by, and I thought, well, I looked it up, and it was only present on, like, new agey websites.
Yes. Yes.
Along with, like, vibes and vibrations
Right.
and stuff, and then when I would talk to people about it, like my husband, who's very logical, black and white, saying, like, yeah, that just sounds really silly. Yet, I think anybody can say, like, when you walk into a room and everybody's tense, you know it right away.
Yes.
There's
Right.
something about energy that's not just New Age.
So empathy is particularly the ability to kind of feel for and maybe with other people. But I think for you, kind of, artists are sensitive across the board. They're sensitive to sounds, they're sensitive to feelings, they're sensitive to environments.
I'm sensitive to light, even.
Yes.
I like being in the dark.
And so it's reactive.
Mm-hmm.
That's body based. It's not like just in the mind
Mm-hmm.
It's a heightened sensitivity and reactivity to the world. Now, in the wrong environments, or there are people that are they can be in a very distressing environment, and it's as if they're kind of insulated from all of that. But they're also insulated from finely tuned feelings and experiences.
Mm-hmm.
But it's
So,
hard to be creative. It's hard to be reactive, to be sensitive, because
yes.
it's often overwhelming. If a person's high in empathy and they walk into a room, I say it's like picking up on 20 radio stations at the same time.
Yeah.
When I began therapy, nobody ever mentioned empathy. It was not part of the dialogue.
That's so surprising to me because I mean I'm so familiar with it. It comes up so much that it just I assume it's always been
Right?
talked about.
Right? I do quite a bit of marriage counseling.
Mm.
Imagine loving somebody but not having empathy,
It seems like they go hand in hand.
especially for women, not necessarily for men.
Hmm.
I'm making a very challenging statement there, and a bit, like provocative on purpose. So, almost as a challenge to the audience or something, to just play with this idea that what if it's possible, and for me, it comes from conversations where a person can, like, they love the other person and they can say they love them, but just being able to imagine, but they don't have empathy, and see if that makes the behavior make sense.
Because I think we've all been in arguments with people where, like, no matter how much you're trying to argue, how you feel, why you're acting the way you are, why you're hurt, they just don't seem to register it. They don't understand your
Excellent.
point. And when I argue with someone like that, I feel like a kid who just, like, oh, because your mother's usually the one that understands you. I want that understanding of my mother, the way my mother understands me. I search for that in every person I love who I argue with.
Right. And the flip side of that, imagine being in an argument with an angry person and being fully exposed to feeling their anger, having no defense against, like knowing exactly how they feel about you.
Yeah, that's rough too. That's
Right?
worse almost.
Oh, that's devastating.
Yeah, but as I was saying, we've all been in an argument with somebody that you can't, like, you just can't understand why they don't know why you're feeling. I've been in this situation recently, and then I realized I'm not like, I'm so frustrated they're not understanding me because my emotions are so powerful that
Right.
it's clouding my empathy, and I can't understand
Yes.
why they're reacting because I'm not being empathetic towards them. You can be empathetic but still be clouded by your own emotions and perceptions as well.
Oh, then it's like picking up 30 radio stations.
Oh yeah, and then it's just it's impossible
Right.
to think straight.
Especially to make it verbally clear.
Mm-hmm.
Emotions are not language.
Oh no, I mean there's quotes by so many authors, by Stephen King, by Sylvia Plath, that say, you think of all and these words, like these huge thoughts and ideas and emotions in your head, and then they come out into words and they're belittled. They're nothing once you finally verbalize
Excellent.
them, when you write them down, and that is the story of my everyday life.
Yes. All I write is dust.
Mm-hmm.
That's not what's in my head. Stars in your head and it's dust on the paper.
Yes, but when we come close to a little
That was
something...
my effort at some poetry.
No, I mean, that is accurate, though. Like, it's like blowing off of the original structure. But I think
Excellent.
when writing becomes really magical is when some of that structure remains. And then it is, like Stephen King said, writing is telepathy.
Excellent. And it is authors, it is books that have allowed us to get a handle on all of our experiences and the complexity and the nuance and the variance of that's book sense, the language, and so the ability to express it. And it is miraculous what, like, kind of when an author is able to express that, to express something in a way that's never been expressed before.
Yes, there's a lot of work behind it and technical work, but there is something like a quality that seems
And it
magical.
endures.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, through time. I mean, it's amazing. When you read historic literature from long ago, and we seem so removed from the past, but then you realize, like reading Jane Eyre or something and her frustrations, that the way the human mind works, even though
Excellent.
circumstances change, it's not much changes as far as internal emotions. Thoughts.
Excellent. And perhaps if I have any talent as a therapist, it maybe came from books, allowing the ability to like go into people's minds, and to be able to have the language to do that. But it's not language I invented. It's language that like an author guided me there at some point.
You couldn't have been the therapist you are without books.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Not. And not the nonfic, like not psychology books about human experience.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I've been reading a lot of nonfiction lately, and people question the value of fiction, and it's for that. Even though it's might be a made-up character, something that's the closest you can get to being inside of another person's head or another person's experience, it can change your world.
Yes. And what this author did, and I think we were close to something in mentioning we all know invisible people. We've all been invisible. At first, this is really, really strange. And it's only like a character in a book. But I think that experience of life may not be uncommon at all.
Being invisible?
Being and even experiencing yourself that way and accepting it and living in your corner of the world and living a tiny life.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of being baffled sometimes about what all the fuss is about, or by all of the, or just not hooked by anything on a larger scale. It could be millions of people.
It certainly is. I mean, it's seen as...
And everyone, perhaps, at times.
But yet, like, not connecting to what's popular in culture, or not connecting to culture in general, is sometimes seen as like pretentious. You know, like that's something that I worry about a lot when I'm around people.
Yes.
And I don't connect. And
Right.
so I make an effort now, because there is importance, and I look at what's popular, what people care about. There is importance to that as well.
It was a book by Marie-Louise von Franz that is a Jungian analyst, where this term, like, you're not special, kind of comes from. And there's, because she wrote about creative people that feel like they're above everything and like they're kind of too good for this or that. And so imagine like how much good medicine working in a convenience store is for kind of keeping your feet on the ground and not going to that Vogue's Person of the Year or whatever, not going to this place where you're removed from everybody on the other end of the spectrum.
Yeah, I've seen floating around the internet, you know, every person should work as a waiter or waitress at some point in their life.
Yes.
And I definitely think that's true.
Right.
And as I was mentioned this towards the beginning, you know, celebrities are often treated as, you know, almost
royalty.
Like gods of our time,
yes.
And royalty. And I wonder if sometimes I wonder if their experience is so, like, consciousness is different, because especially people who are born into it, they've never been invisible. To never be invisible, no matter how badly you want to be, to not have the opportunity to be invisible, it must alter.
Yeah. Well, you've even mentioned having the privilege of, or the ability, or not being in a situation where there's a desperate need, like driving things. Yeah, so it's like there are many people that can't imagine that. And that is an amazing, um, but you can't fake it either. You can't just step out of, kind of whatever circumstances you're in.
Oh no, I mean, it's like with celebrities, it's even more unattractive. Or they get a lot of like spite when they say, "Oh, I'm just like you." I understand the average person's experience. Right.
So with this character, I mentioned like contempt. It sounds like the male character was pretty close to kind of seeing her as the fool. Mm-hmm. Like would people see her life, her experience of life, as folly or foolishness, or as...
And certainly she was accused of being stupid in the book, because if you're smart, wouldn't you be ambitious? They're linked.
Yes. And yet if we use Blake's kind of idea, well, we can't really, because that's not that character, but I'm reaching to kind of connect things, but it's she is... This author got off the path of the conventional. At first, to write a book about convenience store woman would have seemed like folly in the beginning. Or pitching the book would seem like folly.
And this is, as I mentioned, she was already a successful novelist, or she wrote other books and stories that weren't translated. But I wonder if she didn't already have some notoriety. Would this book have been published?
Imagine pitching it.
Yeah. I mean, but she does. Like, that's her life, too. I mean, I read this and then read about her life, and I wonder how much of this is memoir, pretty much.
So to see the world in a grain of sand, or to kind of see with these new eyes, to gain this new perception through books... Do you think you'll ever see a convenience store or a convenience store worker the same way?
I mean, this stuff, since I read this, I already think, I mean, I don't want to ever try to treat people as just like robot, mechanical, like whoever I'm with. But yeah, it does change your perspective, and that's the importance of book sense. It adds so much complexity that it takes some time and some confusion to work through the complexity. I still haven't figured it out. But
yes, the main thing that brilliant authors do is they show us our assumptions that you can't see until an author shows it to you.
Yeah, and it's always uncomfortable.
And disorienting, yes. Because our assumption is everyone has ambition, everyone has dreams, everyone is in the experience I'm in, and that my friends are in. Mm. And there's infinite variety.
Yeah. Exposes, I say it's uncomfortable because it exposes sometimes your own prejudices or biases.
Excellent.
You don't realize you have, no matter how hard you work to be a good person. I don't want to say kind anymore, but a person.
It's allowed. Yeah. I didn't mean to contaminate the word.
No, but no matter how hard you work to be a person that...
But it also shows it's hard to really be kind until, kind of through the assumptions.
Yeah. I mean, that's what books help me with, is admitting, all of these internalized biases and trying to undo this knot that is huge.
So what if that's what the postmodern is doing, and why people feel so resistant to it? it is this continual showing you of your biases, and no matter how, and assumptions, and no matter how many of them you step out of them, as soon as you start perceiving, you're back in biases that you um, that you find as you live along.
Yeah.
But it's not a pleasant experience to be shown.
Oh no, and as I was thinking about this, and we briefly talked about this before we started recording, I was thinking, can we ever change anyone's mind? Just like through talking, without, because I said,
Excellent.
I hesitate, like, to speak or write, because I know from experience that people only learn through change. I have only, as much as I want to change, I have only actually changed because of suffering, because it was uncomfortable for me. Of course, I've learned so much from people's experience, from listening to, watching YouTube channels, from reading books. I learned. But as far as like bad habits, or, you know, being jealous, or these little bad qualities, I only learned because I was very uncomfortable and I was suffering.
Excellent. Which is behind my little saying, people don't change, they grow. So I can say I want to change this or that habit, and it doesn't change often. Or I want to change how I perceive the world. So authors help us grow, and they, not by, you said, are people, can we change? Are we going to change? We've certainly learned we can manipulate people. But that's not what you're talking about. And then, can you ever really convince people of a different opinion or change their mind through, like, convincing them or persuading them? I like the way authors do it. You don't even know to be resistant, and they just show you another life, and they open your eyes to something you didn't even know to be resistant to. And they're not convincing you of anything. They're helping you perceive something you didn't perceive before. That can't not change the mind.
But as I was talking about it, can we learn through experience? I was thinking about that especially because I mentioned this earlier. I may have mentioned this last week. I read the book called Parkland by David Cullen, and he was talking about the Parkland kids who, before their experience survived a school shooting, they weren't political activists. And they're trying so hard. I've watched debates with NRA, members of the NRA, and it seems as if it was so frustrating for me to read, because it seems as if they weren't changing anyone's minds, no matter how many facts, how much of their experience they shared. It was just like this wall. And I think they mentioned it, but I was thinking this too, is the only way these people who, like, they're trying to convince is if their children were shot. Is that the only way? Through hardship, through tragedy, that we learn? It's cynical, but...
It makes me think of the word compassion. I was working with somebody last week, and compassion, the word passion is Latin for suffering. And so compassion is suffering with. And so I often tell people there are only two things we can do with our pain. Some people, if we defend ourselves against pain, there's this strategy of defending yourself from it, making someone else feel it. Or once you felt pain, your heart opens to compassion. And so in a sense, like, kind of whether to open your heart or not, in some sense is a choice. Now the person doesn't experience it as a choice, but what these kids are trying to say so passionately, at some point there's kind of this decision, and again, in order to reach other goals or to be tough, we were just talking about that, like, don't be too mushy, don't be too caring, suck it up and let's go. There's a deafness, and as terrible as a school shooting is, and that's the real tragedy, but what if there's another one underway of disillusionment in the survivors?
Yeah. and your worldview gets shattered.
And that is something like shared.
What was interesting, though, is the Parkland shooting was different because many of those kids expected it. Say their worldview was shattered, but maybe even not. A lot of kids said, I expected a school shoot. I grew up even going through school shooter drills. I remember in kindergarten going into a closet and my music teacher standing in front of us saying that she would protect us. And I asked my mom, I said, did you have school shooting drills? She said,
no.
No.
No, we had the atomic bomb drills.
Yeah, something I never experienced.
And fire drills and right. But in many ways, the 60s going into the 70s and 80s was this kind of a disillusionment. All we have to do is let people know, and the world will change. All we got to do is show the facts, and the world will change. All we got to do is show...
But change eventually. I think that's the most frustrating part of it all. It feels like, unless progress is fairly immediate, it doesn't feel like progress at all. But sometimes it takes decades for change.
So again, that's why I like this word growth rather than change. Because it is organic, it is slow.
Yeah. But that was a great book for that's one that made me feel very, not defensive, but it changed my worldview in a way. Because I was...
Which one?
Parkland. Because
yes.
I've never actually, never been to a political rally. I've never been an activist. I was just the world is so, divisive. I don't have the courage to. Then I realized it's time to get some courage, or I want to be a part of the conversation. If I'm doing nothing, am I a part of the problem? Especially about, then it opened the doors to environmentalism and all these catastrophes. So, yeah.
And again, it was a book.
Yeah, but it's not every book I read, but there's some that's just so, I can feel, although I say growth, or change takes time, I feel it immediately.
You can feel it in your cells.
Yeah, immediately. I feel although I still haven't acted, but I've educated myself more in the past month than I have in the past lifetime.
Yes. So we don't say this child changed. We say this child grew. Technology changes, biology. Each time that happens, you don't throw out the old. You expand, something is added to what you already were.
And you already were, but what about all that, all the bias and all of the stuff that's not so great, or if people are racist or hateful or homophobic.
So growth is just as much like something's taken away from who you used to be. And hopefully the difference is, and this is this uncomfortable phrase sometimes, baby in bathwater, what growth is, you never throw the baby out. Whatever is working for you, whatever is still valued, it's holding on to that, and it is often letting go of what was holding you back and what is no longer serves, what's no longer appropriate. So it's this constant filtering or weeding of letting the good stuff grow, or the stuff that's alive grow, and letting other stuff.
I think this is a quote that I brought up the first week, I read it in a book or in an article, that change is so hard because our growth is so hard because as you grow, not only do you lose the bad stuff, the negative stuff, you also lose some really positive things that you've learned.
Oh.
And that is what's so hard. Sometimes that's hard to better yourself.
We were just talking about Parkland, innocence. Certain kind of innocence is always kind of the price.
That's why, especially authors, they're so nostalgic for their childhood.
Excellent.
I'm so nostalgic for it because that's something that absolutely will never be regained. It's not something that can be synthesized. So.
Right? Nostalgia is as close as you can get to holding the past. It's as close as you can get to it. But perhaps even nostalgia is a way of carrying it into your current forms.
Yeah, I said, is that all the negative stuff, is it still there? Even if it's technically, like, it's gone, we've lost it, I think remembering that you've had it at one point is a way of making sure that it doesn't come back, that it doesn't become a part of who you are again.
Right. And we were kind of using this enlightenment thought that it's like kept or thrown away, good and bad. And it's more, growth is more like it gets transformed into something else entirely sometimes. So it's not even rejected or thrown away, it's transformed into something entirely different. In one of our episodes, we use a quote by Marshall McLuhan that goes, "There are no passengers on Spaceship Earth. We are all crew." This is how we see Book Sense. Gale and I are crew, so are you. We hope for your contributions, perspectives, and conversations to build Book Sense and make it better and better. Until next time,